Sometimes it's really hard to get a car back together and make the call, especially with a team that's not been on the circuit and used to that kind of a thrash between rounds.
I'll tell you, this funny car matchup has a lot of personality. Glen Mikres in the Joe Pisano JP1 Oldsmobile up against Mike Dunn in the Snickers automobile. Mike Dunn used to drive for Joe Pisano. In fact, he won 2 U.S. Nationals titles for Joe. He's now living in Pennsylvania and working for the Ed Abel team, who put together this magnificent operation. Glen Mikres, Riverside, California, had his best ever outing just 2 weeks ago at the Winter Nationals, when in the semifinal round, he defeated Mike Dunn in that Snickers car. So there's a lot of friendship and a lot of rivalry between these two teams. Let's see what happens. Dunn away first. Mikres charges, but not enough. Mike Dunn wins it with a slower elapsed time. He won it on the whole shot, 5:36 to a 5:35, 274 to a charging 280 by Glen Mikres. So it's Dunn who goes to the final 4. Let's have one more look at it, Don. I think we'll see the car in the far lane lead first.
Looks to me like it was a beautiful starting line advantage taken by Mike Dunn. I've got to kind of feel in my heart that he's a little bit more experienced than Mikres. This is his first ride in a very fast car. This car of Pisano runs over 280 miles an hour. So, you know, that's a little something to handle. So maybe he was thinking about that. Anyway, he made the charge at the end, but it wasn't enough to catch Mike Dunn.
Nice hole shot and a nice win.
That was a close race. I knew I was going to have to get ahead of that car because I drove it before, and I know how hard that thing runs on the other end, and I was kind of looking over about 1,000-foot mark, and luckily we held off and got the win.
Your 36 beat his 35.
Yeah, it was a close race, so we didn't want to overpower the track. We stepped on a little bit, but I think the air got a little bit worse, and it was just kind of a push from the last round.
Can your dad put this thing in the 520s?
I don't know. I think he can. I know he can eventually. Whether we get enough runs to do it, we're going to step on it a little bit more next round, and it'll step up and run a little bit better. He's the best.
You betcha. See you then.
Thanks.
Well, his dad just happens to be Jim Dunn of funny car fame, and if anybody's got the experience, it's certainly Jim. Meanwhile, we have the final pair in the second round of funny car action, John Force versus Al Hofmann. As we go to the in-car camera on John Force's car, we see a very strange piece of equipment on the center of your screen that we don't see on anybody else's car. Steve took a look.
John Force and his crew chief Austin Coyle have a reputation for doing everything just a little bit different. Let me show you the latest wrinkle on Force's car. Now, this round hole is required in funny car windows on both sides by NHRA. In case of fire, the safety safari can get a fire hose in there to cool off the driver. This hole, that's unique to John Force, and he calls it the chimney. Again, we'll look inside. Now, notice at the firewall, there is a stovepipe. Really, that's stovepipe material you'd find on a wood stove. And here's the reasoning behind it. When a blower explodes on one of these cars, and John has had a lot of those, most of the fire and force comes out of the back of the manifold. Well, now, when the body is latched down, you see that great big round hole up there surrounded by the silver screws? Well, that's the chimney. When the body is down, that lines up with the back of the manifold. Hopefully, they'll take all of that force and all of that fire and exit it through the smokestack. Force says that's all well and good, but he's hearing weird noises now, engine sounds inside the car that he never heard before. They're routed in there as well.
Well, the team obviously trying to figure out ways to not damage the body in those explosions and let that force exit harmlessly to the atmosphere.
Well, there is the BDS, that stands for Blower Drive Service Car of Al Hofmann. And there's a chalk mark on the pavement made by his wife, Helen, to make sure they back that car up in exactly the burnout tracks, where the track is the hottest and the rubber is down the best. Tom Anderson, crew chief, latches down the emergency hatch, and they had to change engines. We talked about that earlier. Al Hofmann qualified right in the middle of the pack, number 8 at 5:44, beat Tom Hoover in round number 1. Now, John Force picked up Budweiser's $4,000 bonus for qualifying number 1, and he took out Gary Ritter in round 1. But actually, it is Hofmann who right now has low elapsed time of the event for the free. That 5:28 engine damaging 5:28 in round 1. Let's see if Hofmann's new power plant is up to John Force and his stovepipe. What a ride we had with John Force. Straight as a string. A car can't be driven any better than that to a winning 5:35, 265. Al Hofmann comes by on the right. He could only muster a 550 at 231 miles per hour with his new power plant. So the final 4 is set here at Phoenix. It'll be John Force versus Mike Dunn. Force will have the lane choice, but only by about 1/100 of a second. And for you kids out there, it'll be Del Worsham versus Jim White. White will have the lane choice by a country mile.